Hi Ash, so I've asked you to come onto my channel today because obviously you've got your experience in children's services and you've also got some amazing products out right now under your new generation social work. So do you want to tell me a bit about that?
Hi, Kaylee. Thanks for having me today. I do feel nervous, Kaylee. So,
Oh,
do
oh,
do
you'll
take
be
it easy.
okay.
Yeah. So, yes, I'm a social worker. I've been qualified for 6 years now.
Hmm.
And out of the six, I've practiced 5 years in frontline child protection, ranging from the assessment team, up to my previous. My last role was a senior practitioner in a court team, so very much court based. So I've pretty much walked the spectrum of child protection, which has been really challenging, but also very interesting and crucial to my fundamental learning around child protection. So yeah. And yes, New Generation Social Work. So I am the founder of New Generation Social Work, which is a project that seeks to provide and supply bespoke toolkits for professionals in social work.
So just to sort of give people an outline of what they could expect in this video, we're just going to be doing sort of a low key discussion around initial thoughts about a case study which is made up by
Mhm.
myself, but you're going to unpick it. And I haven't given you this in advance, so it's quite on the spot.
Good.
So we'll see how we get on with this.
Oh, well, I hope I can do it justice, Kelly. What I'll do is put my social worker hat on in a nice informal way, actually. And I think that's what's the positive and the benefits around your platform, Kaylee. It gives me an opportunity to actually just not be so official, but at the same time, I can talk about the things that I love and that I do every day, which is social work and practice. But do it, we'll talk about it and reflect on some of the things that I do um, in a more informal way and in a safe way. But
Yeah.
so, and allowing me to be me, allowing me to be sort of Ash, who is Ash, and not Ash, the social worker, who's the lead practitioner, and everyone's sort of kind of relying on. So that's quite different, and
Hmm.
I think within that there's value within that itself because it can actually then stimulate a bit more of a learning experience that well, the listeners or your audience and students and practitioners themselves can then just connect to in a way that doesn't make them feel kind of like switched on in a formal way, and
Hmm.
then hopefully they can then resonate with that and say, well, actually, that makes sense, or oh, I get that, or I can resonate with that, or I connect with that. Does that, do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Does
that
that make
totally
sense?
makes sense. Yeah,
Mm.
brilliant. Right, well, we'll get into it. Right, so the referral is it's come through from early help out of hours. A dad has said that he has noticed some bruising to his child's arm. They've contacted children's social care. What would you think about in this scenario?
Right. Okay. So I'm going to get my social worker's hat on there for you, Kaylee.
Thank you.
Um, so initially, as a social worker, that could mean many things. I think the key here at this initial stage is not to jump to any assumptions.
Hmm.
I think the appropriate next steps in these circumstances would be to actually then go out and then to undertake a few undertake an assessment.
Yeah.
But as part of that assessment is and what I would be doing if I was a social worker here is to explore the nature of the bruising. So of course we know that there's bruising that a child has sustained. Now it could be anything. It could be an accidental injury. It could be a non-accidental injury. My aim here now is to ascertain whether it's either one of the two. Of course, if it's a non-accidental injury, it just may be that parents were busy.
Hmm.
It could mean that parents might need a bit more support around supervision, structures, routines, and boundaries. It may mean that they've been struggling with baby, and so all of these kind of situations do pull out and do sort of extrapolate when you're trying to identify, what's led to harm. Harm is a strong word, so I wouldn't use harm in this context as of yet because I haven't ascertained whether a child has been harmed intentionally or not. So those are sort of the initial inquiries that I would make. Of course, the protocol will be very much different is if I have spoken to parents, and I have, it's starting to reveal within itself that, well, actually, this possibly could go into non-accidental injury.
Hmm.
And then the protocol under the Children Act 1989 here, Kelly, would be very much different. So those are the two sort of possible outcomes. But
Yeah.
in terms of, let's just go back a little bit and just talk about, because I feel it's always important at this stage to talk about some of the steps that you would take
Hmm.
to that will then arrive to an actual decision as part of the process. And so one of the things that I would do here as part of an assessment would be to go out and to obviously undertake some observations. Observations here is really, really key of the child given the age. As part of my observations here, I would really get a feel and a flavour of the home environment. And that would include me having to, have how do I put it? I would say they call it a welfare visit, but what that entails is, you go around the family home and you would ask to see the children's the bedroom. Um, that's on a structural level. But what I'm looking here when I'm entering a family's home is what we're trying to understand what lifestyle looks like.
Hmm.
We're trying to understand, and you'll be surprised how much the physical condition of a home will actually tell you that. You're trying to understand what the dynamics of the relationship between the parents look like. You're trying to understand what their understanding of child development is. You're trying to ascertain what the relationship with the child is. What you're looking at is family support here and what the relationships and connections are within the family. And on the wider level here, what we're trying to look at is community support, how integrated within the community they actually are. Are there any indications, any signs of social exclusion? So all of those features will take part of an initial assessment, what do you call it, an initial information gathering process.
Hmm.
And then once I've kind of made sense of all of that, we can then talk a little bit, we can then actually then narrow the scope, narrow the view, and start talking about in isolation, well, actually, what's happened here? How has this occurred? How has this child sustained this injury?
Hmm.
And then my line of inquiry at this point will be very much focused more on injury. And then it becomes a little bit more child protection, investigation type inquiry. And for me to do that here at this stage, I'd have an isolated. I think for me, what I would do is it depends on where or who um, kind of takes the blame in terms of how baby or child sustained an injury here. So for me to again to get a feeling, a sense of that, I'll have an isolated conversation between both parents.
Hmm.
And I'll ascertain their views in terms of what's led to the circumstances, what's your understanding and your view of what's happened, um, and get a feel of their views.
Okay.
Does that make
No, that's
sense?
absolutely perfect. So it's really holistic, isn't it? And
There's
would,
a lot. So what I'm trying to do
yeah.
here is really unpick it,
Hmm.
um, because sometimes in social work, we really like to focus on decisions,
Yeah.
but the decision is the outcome. So there's so many different phases before we arrive,
Yeah.
and so it's holistic, and those are all of the views and that's the process. It has to be comprehensive before we can ascertain any kind of decision that we're making.
And it's not about like jumping to conclusions or without the evidence.
Absolutely,
So yeah.
ab- absolutely.
And obviously it's important, isn't it, that you looked at the child's room. You're not afraid to sort of look at
Hmm.
everywhere in the household.
Yeah, so if we're looking at a baby, again, it's different. It varies on the child's age, and it's very different. So if we're looking between 0 and 5, usually baby will sleep in parents' room, from my
Hmm.
experience. So we're looking at cots, we're looking at sleeping arrangements that are very much accommodated for a child, that then requires a parent's supervision during the night, because they're very
Hmm.
much dependent on that parent to meet their needs. And so I'll be looking at hazards. It could be physical hazards. I'll be looking at hazards that pertain to a cot. We're looking at the risk of a child suffocating at night. We're looking at risks of a child maybe strangling himself, or we're looking at electrical hazards. So it sounds kind of strange, but at the same time, believe it or not, all of that will give you an understanding of what a parenting approach is, what their understanding and the perception, what their view of parenting actually is. Um, which will then inform pretty much later on. It all does then begin to start to come together, and it helps you form a bigger analysis.
So we're sort of talking about the initial stage, aren't we? Would any other
Mm.
professionals be involved at this point, would you say?
Yes, very much so. And so, of course, we work within a multi-agency context. And so it depends on who's involved. But your bread and butter, your next goal to is always health, is always education. If child's in nursery or in school, safeguarding leads, and so we call them DSLs. They will be your first go-to, and what we will be doing is including their views and ascertaining their understanding of risk, of harm, their level of interaction, their understanding of family circumstances, how well parents are engaging with them, how what the level of understanding parents have in terms of children's needs. And so all of those cues are essential line of inquiries when we're working um, within and across professionals at different agencies. Now we can get again that those are your mundane agencies. Now sometimes there's wider concerns around maybe alcohol, or there may be concerns around domestic violence. There could be concerns around mental health,
Hmm.
um, and so then you will start going a little bit more into your inquiries will be a little bit more, I wouldn't use the word specialized, but a bit more bespoke in that sense, because you're very much dependent on the expert themselves rather than yourself. It's I think it's very important to mention, Kaylee, that one of the ideas behind multi-agency working is that we are social workers. We're not absolute experts
Yeah.
in the right of every field. So I'm not an expert in mental health, nor am I an expert in domestic violence. I mean, I have substantial experience in working with mental health. Also substantial experience working with domestic violence, or disability, or learning disability, neurodiversity, things like that. But a part of my inquiries when I'm working with a multi-agency context will be that I'm dependent on the expertise, the skills, the knowledge, the experiences of the other professionals, and I rely on them. I rely on that expert sort of knowledge and understanding to then inform the basis of my understanding and my assessment.
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant. I think that's a really comprehensive sort of look at that case study. So thank you for your input on that. I think people find that really helpful.